Hello and welcome everybody. Thank you for tuning in. I am Akshat from the Foundation for Democratic Reforms. Today in conversation with Dr. JP, our founder and general secretary. Good afternoon, Dr. JP.
Good afternoon, Akshat.
Now, sir, in an event that many feel signals the end of red terror in the country, a letter supposedly written by one of the chiefs of the outlawed Communist Party of India Maoists states the Maoists' willingness to surrender, lay down arms, and begin talks. The letter states, and I quote, "In order to take forward the process of peace talks, we are making it clear that, in view of the changes in circumstances, as well as the request put forward by the Prime Minister, Home Minister, and senior police officials, we aim to give up arms and join the mainstream." The letter also asks for about a month to consult their cadre before they begin the peace talks with the union government. Now, sir, first off, your initial thoughts on the letter.
No, if it is a true letter, it's not a doctored document, a fictitious document, I think we should welcome it.
Yeah.
Because ultimately, in a democratic society, whatever the path they have chosen, as long as they hold arms and indulge in violence, there is no recourse for the state except to crush them. There's no choice. But by lawful means, within the bounds of the constitutional law. There cannot be any compromise on that, because otherwise democracy, constitution, and sovereignty, they lose all meaning. But we also must recognize that there are socio-economic factors of inequality, sometimes caste discrimination, continuing feudal oppression in a still society that is trying to transition from feudalism to modernity, and all kinds of challenges. In the face of that, sometimes people are confused, or they are misinformed, and sometimes they indulge in violence. While violence must be resisted firmly and crushed, we must also give them an opportunity to come back to the mainstream. And that's how, in fact, this kind of left-wing extremist movements world over were handled. In our own country, while when necessary the governments were firm, they were also keeping open the door for discussion, for coming back in the mainstream, and rehabilitating them as much as possible. So if that's a true statement, I think it's a good thing, because in a large part, the then Andhra Pradesh, now Telangana, the extremist movement in the current form, which started in the late 1970s, when two taluks in those days, Jagtyala and Sirsila, in the Karimnagar district, they were declared as disturbed areas because of the Naxalite threat or Maoist threat. But Andhra Pradesh took some years, maybe about 2 decades after that, a little more than 2 decades, maybe 25 to 30 years. But by a variety of steps. One is maintaining order and applying the law of the land firmly. At the same time, the political and administrative decisions taken to embrace the local people, expand the welfare system, etc., they all led to near complete elimination of violent left-wing extremism. But in other states, adjoining states, in Maharashtra, for instance, it continued for some time, I think, in Chandrapur, Gadchiroli, other areas. Chhattisgarh, erstwhile Madhya Pradesh, now Chhattisgarh, still sees that. And if there is now a reconsideration on the part of the extremist movement, I think we should welcome it, take it seriously, and then encourage them to join the mainstream and give them as decent a deal as possible to encourage that process all over the country.
So I must state that at the time of this interview, the security agencies have not verified the authenticity.
So we don't know
So
yet.
we don't know yet. But do you think it also, because it comes at the back of some serious inroads made by the government in recent years in terms of the number of surrenders and also the operations that were successful, which led to a lot of the top cadre being eliminated. So how much do you think that plays a part?
No, in cases like this, you require both the carrot and the stick,
Yeah.
because these are your own people. These are not extraterritorial people who are trying to undermine the sovereignty of India. These are misguided people who, in their enthusiasm for what they believe is a philosophy of violent overthrow of the existing order to establish what they believe is a socialist or an equal society, they are misguided. Therefore, governments must do whatever is possible to bring them to the mainstream because there are real issues in our society. So there are many factors that precipitate this. One is definitely the pressure from the police and the governments. Increasingly, if you find that it's not viable to continue a movement like this in a violent form and being underground, etc. The second is the recruits, generally speaking, if you go by the erstwhile Andhra Pradesh experience, most of the recruits are from the lower middle class or poor families, mostly from single parent families. And a substantial number from the castes which were generally disadvantaged over a period of time. Unlike the first Naxalite movement, Naxalbari, when a lot of romantic idealism prevailed and therefore a lot of well-educated people joined the movement, most of the cadres in this phase are the poor and deprived ones. And then they have romantic notions because they notice that your neighbor or somebody else who took to the gun like this is now respected, is venerated. The district collector and SP and others are no, they are treating them as important people, taking them very seriously. So it's very exciting. When you combine with the notion, though a very immature notion of justice, and then your significance, importance, and the general poverty and neglect in your own environment. So they come in. They come in at a relatively young age. But once you come to be of marriageable age, several years you spent underground, a lot of hardship. Several of your colleagues would have died in encounters or police action and their operations. And you also want to get settled in life. You want to marry. So all these things happen. So that is when many people want to come out individually. So surrenders typically are after several years. When they're of marriageable age or something, they want companionship, they want a settled family, etc. They come out. And governments, when they also give some inducement, some kind of rehabilitation package, that becomes easier. But a movement as a whole, doing that is actually a good augury. But the other factors also are there. The other factors being politics until 1970s or perhaps even 80s in most parts of the country was elite politics. The ordinary people were not touched on a day-to-day basis. But mass politics came probably in 1980s. One of the first to take politics to the masses was the late NTR in Andhra Pradesh. Until that time, a legislator could be completely disconnected from the people. Only election time you come to the people, you deal with the village elders and others, you get elected, and people generally don't matter. There's no link. But post NTR, for instance, in Andhra Pradesh, and that happened, I think, in varying phases throughout the country. On a day-to-day basis, the access to the politicians, elected politicians, particularly the state assembly members, became very, very free. And unless a politician addresses the day-to-day concerns, it should not be his job. But in the absence of effective local governments, it became the local legislator's job. So if that doesn't happen, the politician, even if he's otherwise corrupt and otherwise not a very desirable character, that politician will not have any political viability. So that means there is now access, there is now some kind of a feedback, and there is some grievance redressal possible. And political parties are continuously engaging with the people for their own political reasons because there's fierce competition electorally in the country.
Yeah.
And parties are offering collective developmental goals, but more often they're offering individual welfare schemes. And individual welfare is getting better and better. Early days of welfare, it was not really reaching the people. A lot of leakage, a lot of corruption. But increasingly, since 1980s, 1990s and 2000s, increasingly there is this universalization of welfare. Practically everybody gets it, large number get it, and there's more digital technology, more impersonal approach, and the selection of beneficiaries is much better. So welfare is actually reaching the people. And that also attracted the people. On the other side, where the extremist movement was strong, even infrastructure could not be built because they were foolishly blocking that. They were attacking contractors. They were blasting bridges and things like that. And people realized that by not participating in the democratic activity, however flawed it is, they're actually the losers.
Yeah.
That's why, oftentimes in those days, the extremist movements used to give a call for boycott of elections. But by and large, people ignored the boycott call. By and large, they participated because they felt, however flawed democracy is, a democratic participation is a better guarantor of receiving both welfare and development than non participation. So that's a good development. If only local governments are much stronger and more powerful, it would have run a lot better in the country. But such as it is, with all the flaws, the political process is trying to reach out to everybody, and embrace them in the larger democratic process. And I think that is a bigger cause than mere police action or force.
So you did mention about Andhra Pradesh and how it was relatively more successful than other states in perhaps combating this ill. So what was it about AP that worked? You mentioned that there was development along with police force. So
AP was probably the first state to face it in the new avatar. Earlier, 1960s, Naxalbari was a romantic movement, ideological entirely. Second stage was a reaction to certain local conditions and much more hard-headed and militarized Naxalism, if you can use the word Naxalism.
this is the 70s.
In the 70s, late 70s, I think was much more militarized. But as I said, that coincided with a few years later with the rise of mass politics with a charismatic politician and welfare system increasingly better and better administered and embracing the whole society in the political mainstream. And that helped. And because it was the first state and police suffered several blows, many policemen lost their lives and limb in these Naxal attacks. So police developed professional skills, intelligence, and they also realized it can't be dealt with only as a law and order problem. So many superintendents of police and officials, they actually mingled with the communities locally, rural communities, the tribal communities and others, and developed the personal contact and bonds, and made sure that developmental projects actually reached them, and welfare projects reached them, and the governments were very flexible in giving them the kind of tools required to make that happen. So a combination of that, the political part of it, the developmental and mass politics and welfare part of it, and the police improved techniques and intelligence, they led to, by and large, rooting out of the extremist threat from Andhra Pradesh. But across the border, if they are under pressure here, they could go across the border. After all, borders are only on a map. There is no wall there. There is no fence there. So that's how either Maharashtra, some parts, which I think is diminished now in Maharashtra significantly, but much more so in Chhattisgarh today. It continued, and I'm happy to note, if this is true, this news is true, that there is hopefully an end of this form of extremist movement.
So were there certain conditions in AP that led to these measures being successful, which perhaps are not the case in Chhattisgarh or Maharashtra?
I think it's a question of time. The police leadership, the political leadership, and politics reaching out within a fiercely competitive environment and welfareism, a combination worked. Each state has its own different kind of history and different topography, for instance. But I think they're all learning lessons from the Andhra Pradesh experience, erstwhile Andhra Pradesh experience, and in some way or other adapting that to local conditions. And that seems to be working.
So do you think that a big reason was also maybe that generation of youth that joined the ranks, they probably grew a little disenchanted with the whole life?
Absolutely. See, if you take 1960s, socialism was the dominant theme. And everybody believed that, and they mouthed those slogans, etc. Even by late 70s and 80s, socialism started failing. Soviet Union, erstwhile Eastern European bloc under Soviet thumb, many other countries, and the change, 180-degree change in China, for instance, while still they were under Communist Party control, they embraced market economy with gusto. And our own economic reform in 1991 produced remarkable results. From a scarcity and corrupt economy, where everything you had to depend on somebody and nothing was available, we saw a significant amount of availability of goods and services and competition, which improved the quality of goods and reduced the prices, relatively speaking. And some prosperity coming up. While it's not yet uniform, the growth is still not inclusive enough, but there's definitely growth and everybody is better off. So I don't think any young person now in the country is consciously joining Communist Party. 50 years ago, whether it was a overground Communist Party adopting peaceful means or the underground Communist Party adopting violent means of the barrel of the gun, 50 years ago, it was 60 years ago, 70 years ago, it was fashionable to be part of the communist ecosystem. Now, I don't know of any young person in any college or university who voluntarily wants to join a communist party. Occasionally, because of family background, some people may be tempted, but there's no recruitment at all. So the world has changed. But it does not mean that the problems have disappeared. I want to caution. Because we have still 85% unorganized sector. People who are eking out a precarious livelihood. They have low skills and low incomes. Unless we formalize them, unless we give them skills, unless we enhance their competitiveness and their productivity, unless their incomes rise, there's always a challenge in the country because growth is touching everybody, but it is touching mostly the better off people, the well-educated and skilled people, and the people with capital and connections and urban people. It's not touching adequately the poor people, the semi-literate people with no skills, and people without capital or network, and rural people mostly. And we cannot continue that unless we have inclusive growth. Growth is necessary. There's no question about it. Economic growth is happening. It's necessary. But unless the bulk of the people feel that they are part of the growth process and their lives and their children's lives are going to get better, it may take a little bit of time, but it will get better. Unless that confidence is there across the all sections of society, we're always potentially volatile. It may not be in the form of a left-wing extremist movement, but there can be some agitations and violence on the streets, there can be a lot of anger, or they may vote against growth in the elections. If you take Telangana, 2023 December election, 24 constituencies, assembly constituencies in and around Hyderabad, every one of those constituencies Congress lost. Because Congress basically offered all kinds of welfare. Whereas until that time, whatever be the flaws, the perception was that the government was delivering growth and infrastructure. Now, in these 24 constituencies in Hyderabad city, obviously a majority of people felt the growth is touching them. There is hope. They didn't believe that the government was perfect. Nobody believes in India that governments are perfect. We know corruption, we know delays, we know incompetence, we know partisanship, we know failure of rule of law. All these are known. But despite that, growth is taking place in a demonstrable, visible manner, is touching practically everybody. The response of the electorate was of one kind. In rural areas, people voted for welfare because they did not feel growth was touching them adequately. This is a telling demonstration in electoral politics with quantitative evidence. So unless the growth actually touches not only the big cities but the villages and small towns, not only the rich and powerful people and skilled people and educated people, but the ordinary people, the society will be volatile. So even if there is no violence on the street, politically, the vote will be construed as against growth. I don't think anybody is voting against growth, but it will be construed as against growth, and India will go down the path of excessive welfare at the cost of the future of the children, and poverty will be perpetuated. So that's not going to solve the problem. It will be a vicious cycle. So we must be very conscious and humble about it. The growth is still not touching the bulk of the ordinary people in the country adequately. And we must make sure that their skills, their employability, local industrialization, local services, local job creation, formalization, higher incomes, and through that, elimination of poverty. That's absolutely critical for the country.
So now, on a slightly different note, the MHA, the Union Home Minister, in fact, he announced that by March 2026, we will eradicate the menace of Maoism in the country. And so what he effectively means is the Union Home Ministry will take care of a lot of things. But the state governments also have a role to play in this because law and order is finally a state subject. So having said that, the MHA and the IB, they do play a role. So how do you ensure there's no turf war and each level of government performs its own
No,
role.
as you said rightly, maintenance of order and containing these extremist violent movements are essentially a state subject. Law and order is actually the first subject in the state's list
Yes.
of the seventh schedule. But because these movements really don't respect the boundaries of a state, they are not entirely pan-national, but they transcend the borders of the state. Some kind of intelligence and sometimes even logistics coordination and a comprehensive strategy across all states. Because if in Andhra Pradesh you are able to contain it, but they move to Chhattisgarh or Maharashtra, that's not going to solve the problem for the country. Therefore, some kind of a coherent strategy and each state sharing with other states, the government of India acting as some kind of an interlocutor, is necessary. And two, I think in the current dispensation, the areas where Naxalism is still significant, I think many of them are under the Bharatiya Janata Party government. So the Home Minister probably meant that. It's not necessarily that the federal government, the union government will do it on its own, but that they will give the overall coordination and framework and the confidence, and it will be controlled. So I don't think anybody seriously believes that in matters like this, unless there is a transnational international element or it's terrorism which is beyond the borders of India and extraterritorial support is there. The union government's role is there, but primarily the burden is borne by the state and the state police.
So, do you think that a situation could arise where states probably allege that there's an attack on the federal structure of the country? Or
Not on this issue, because I think there is a unanimity in this country among all the recognized political parties that you cannot allow left-wing extremism or any form of extremism, violent form of activity to prevail. Yes, on occasion they did play politics. In Andhra Pradesh itself, an opposition party seeking power always said that we will bring the Naxalites or the Maoists into mainstream. They said we will unban them when the outfit was banned. For some time, they actually removed the ban. Dr. Channareddy in 1989 lifted the ban. But he had to reintroduce the ban because he realized that they were not willing to come to democratic methods. And then 2004 again, Dr. Rajasekhar Reddy, when he became chief minister, he lifted the ban. There were negotiations, and some of the well-known leaders of the Maoist movement who were underground, they came overground and they discussed, but that didn't work out either. So ban was again reimposed. So partly out of legitimate concern that we must somehow bring into the mainstream, partly as a political ploy, because wherever the Maoists had influence, these parties want to curry their favor to get some votes and seats. So partly that, partly this, there were these efforts. I suppose in a democracy these things are inevitable. But broadly in the country, there is a clear consensus that we cannot allow violence to prevail in a democratic society. Yes, there are problems. Yes, our polity requires significant reform, but violence is not the solution. Overthrowing the democratic order or the constitutional order is not a solution. And as long as you have the right to vote, and as long as you have freedoms to organize, to communicate, to express your protest, and to mobilize people, you have no right to take recourse to violence or obstruction. This is what Dr. Ambedkar said when the Constituent Assembly approved the Constitution on 26th November 1949. He said, now that we have freedom, now that we have our own Constitution, we have self-governance, we have vote, you have no right to protest in an obstructive manner. We must change our earlier protest methods. These bunds and rasta rokos must stop. If bunds and rasta rokos are not right, how can taking the gun and shooting down people be right? So I think there is an impressive consensus in the country. If some politicians break that consensus, they're doing at their own peril.
So now, just before we end, what do you think about the role of armed militia developed by the state? So they're basically arming local tribals in Chhattisgarh. There was a scheme which was later
Salva Judum.
Salva
I think
Judum,
the courts took a view and that was disbanded. No, it's a very complex thing. If the ordinary innocent people are suffering and being killed by a group of armed marauders, then there's a temptation to say, all right, give them the weapons.
Yeah.
But the problem is it's a slippery slope.
Yeah.
One good thing that Indian governments, right from colonial days, have done is we have had strict gun control as a country. Now, if for whatever reason we allow guns to be widely available, I think in the long term it's not good for the country. United States is a standing example. So you strengthen the local police forces, and you have more police outposts, you have more intelligence. You empower the local communities so that they can actually address the problems that are being legitimately raised, so that the people do not feel tempted to go to the extremist or violent methods. So that kind of political response is required. For instance, India is a very highly centralized country, not centralized in Delhi. Very often people think centralization is in Delhi. No. The real power today is in the states. Delhi used to exercise that power 30, 40 years ago, but today Delhi is not the real thing. The power is now in the hands of the chief minister almost entirely, and at the state. Local governments, they exist on paper, but they're irrelevant. So people have no ability to manage their affairs and improve things. And that is one of the real reasons for the democratic crisis in the country. So empower local people with accountability and improve the quality of education, real quality of education, not these bogus passes and mass copying and rote learning, but genuine capacity building and learning levels and skills, and decentralized development to the extent possible, so that locally in small towns they become hubs of economic growth, and a lot of employment at the low end is created. So these are the steps that are required. So it must be addressed through policy response and the political challenge, not through weapons in the hands of the innocent citizens, because it may or may not work for some time. Oftentimes, they're not well trained enough. The chances are that the extremists will come and knock off your weapons. They are trained and you are not. And two, once the culture of using the guns in the hands of the people and governments actually giving those guns, that spreads, that becomes anarchic culture and a violent culture. And gun culture is not a good thing at all. One of the good things that Indian governments have done is over the years, we have fairly strict control of guns. I think we should remain that way.